My parents gave my sister 100K for a house and gave me nothing but failure. So I kept the land. My name is Olivia, and I'm 30 years old. This is the story of my family, a patch of dirt, and how I learned that sometimes the deepest roots grow in the most neglected soil. The night my world cracked wasn't loud. It happened in my parents' living room, a space so familiar it made the betrayal feel sharper. My sister, Emily, sat on the sofa beside her husband, looking radiant. I was in the stiff armchair in the corner, the one nobody ever chose. My father slid a white envelope across the coffee table. "Emily," he said, his voice full of pride, "your mother and I want to help you take the next step." Inside was a check for $100,000. Emily's gasp of gratitude was perfect and practiced. My mother reached over and squeezed her hand, her smile so bright it was blinding. "You've earned it, Emily. You deserve your dream home. You've done everything right." Then her eyes found me in my corner. The smile didn't disappear, but it thinned into something sharp and cold. Pity. It was a look I knew better than my own reflection. "Olivia," she said, her voice cutting through the warmth in the room, "you need to focus on being realistic." I stayed silent, my hands clenched in my lap. "Emily has a stable career and a plan," she continued, laying out my failures as if they were proven facts. "You can't even hold a job." The words ignored the calluses on my hands and the years I'd spent working 16-hour days on a business that eventually failed. They never saw the effort, only the outcome. A small, dry laugh escaped my lips. I felt my hands begin to shake, so I shoved them deep into the pockets of my jeans. I stood up, the movement feeling slow and heavy. "Congratulations, Emily," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I hope you find the perfect house." I walked out of the room without looking back. I didn't need to see their faces. I was thinking about my land, the 5 acres of overgrown brush Dad had deeded to me out of guilt, calling it a useless patch of dirt. To them, it was my consolation prize, a symbol of my failure. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I smiled a real smile, just for myself. They had no idea that the worthless land they mocked was about to become their biggest regret. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, in a house that was always perfectly clean and quietly tense. Our family was a small 3-ring circus, and I was the act nobody paid to see. My dad, Alan, ran a successful construction firm. He built things, sturdy, reliable houses with strong foundations. He was a man who understood right angles and solid support beams, but not the fluid, messy architecture of a daughter who didn't fit his blueprint. My mom, Helen, handled the books for his company. She was meticulous, organized, and everything had its place in her world. Profits in one column, losses in another. Emily, my older sister, was firmly in the profit column. She was born 3 years before me, and from the moment she arrived, she was their masterpiece. She had Mom's classic beauty and Dad's sharp focus. In school, she earned straight A's that were taped to the refrigerator, each one a small trophy. Her honor roll certificates were framed and hung in the hallway. When she was crowned homecoming queen, the local paper ran a photo, and Mom bought 20 copies. Emily went to a good state university, became president of her sorority, and married a banker named Mark at 25, right on schedule. She never took a wrong step, never colored outside the lines. She was a reflection of everything my parents valued: security, predictability, and success that could be measured and displayed. Then there was me, Olivia, the middle child, the one who lived in the quiet spaces between their praise for Emily and their general indifference to my younger brother, who mostly kept to himself with video games. If Emily was their polished statue, I was the leftover clay. I wasn't a bad kid. I just wasn't them. I liked digging in the dirt more than sitting in a classroom. I found stories in the shapes of clouds and the patterns of leaves, things that couldn't be graded or put on a resume. My report cards were a mix of A's in art and English and C's in math and science. "She has potential, if only she'd apply herself," was the common refrain from teachers. My parents heard, "She's not trying hard enough." They saw it as a choice, a form of laziness. When I won a regional award for a charcoal drawing I did of an old, gnarled oak tree, Mom smiled politely and put the certificate in a desk drawer. "That's nice, honey," she'd said, before asking Emily about her upcoming sorority fundraiser. The drawer was where my achievements went to be forgotten. The real break happened when I was 19. I was in my 2nd year of college, studying horticulture, but I was suffocating in lecture halls. I wanted my hands in the soil. I saw a future for myself not in writing papers about plants, but in actually growing them. So I came to them with a plan. I wanted to drop out and start a small, high-end landscaping business. I had it all mapped out. A business loan, a used truck, a list of potential clients. My father looked at me over his reading glasses. "You want to throw away a college education to be a gardener?" The word hung in the air, thick with his disapproval. "It's more than that, Dad. It's design. It's creating spaces for people. It's a real business. It's manual labor, Olivia," my mother said, her voice tight with worry. "It's not a career. It's a hobby." But I was stubborn. I took out the loan myself, using the small college fund they'd set aside for me as collateral. For 2 years, I poured every ounce of myself into that business. They called me a wanderer, but I had never been more focused. My days started at 5 a.m., loading shovels and mulch into my old Ford truck. I worked 16-hour days, sometimes longer, under the brutal Kentucky sun. My hands were raw with blisters that turned into hard calluses. My back ached constantly. I planted other people's dreams. Rows of perfect rose bushes for wealthy clients, lush green lawns for new families. I was good at it. My client list grew. I was finally building something of my own. And then the economy crashed. It started slowly, then all at once. The luxury market dried up. People weren't spending money on elaborate gardens anymore. One by one, my contracts were canceled. The business I had bled for withered and died in less than 6 months. The bank took my truck. I lost everything. To my parents, this was not a tragedy. It was an inevitability. It was proof that they had been right all along. "We told you this would happen," Mom said, her tone a mixture of disappointment and a strange, vindicated satisfaction. They never once said, "You worked so hard." They never acknowledged the effort. They only saw the failure. I was 24, broke and defeated. I had nowhere to go, so I had to move back home. The shame was a physical weight. That's when my dad came to me with the deed. He owned a larger 40-acre parcel of land on the outskirts of town that he'd bought as a long-term investment. He'd had a surveyor carve off a 5-acre section in the back corner. It was landlocked, overgrown with weeds and thorny brush, and the soil was rocky and poor. Nobody would ever want to build on it. "Here," he said, sliding the papers across the kitchen table without making eye contact. "It's yours. A consolation prize, I guess. At least you'll own something." It wasn't a gift. It was an act of guilt, a way to wash his hands of me. He was giving me a piece of earth so I would have somewhere to put my failure. I knew what they were thinking. "She can go play in the dirt there, where it won't embarrass us." I took it. I bought a used, rundown trailer with the last of my savings and had it hauled onto the property. My parents were horrified. "You're going to live in a metal box on a patch of weeds?" Mom cried. "What will people think?" But for me, it was an escape. Sleeping in that trailer, surrounded by the 5 acres of land they saw as worthless, was the first time I felt like I could breathe. That land wasn't a consolation prize. It was a blank page, and they had no idea of the story I was about to write on it. They saw a lazy, directionless daughter. What they never saw, what they refused to see, were the 16-hour days, the sweat, the dirt under my fingernails, and the stubborn, resilient seed of a dream that had been buried but had not died. The breaking point didn't feel like a break at all. It felt like a lock clicking shut, quietly and firmly, on a door I had been trying to jam open my entire life. Emily and Mark closed on their new house in a new, upscale subdivision. It was a massive, modern farmhouse-style home with white siding and a wraparound porch. It was exactly the kind of house my parents would have designed if they were designing a perfect life. I knew every detail without ever setting foot inside because my mother had been talking about it for weeks. The gourmet kitchen, the marble countertops, the spacious backyard that was a blank canvas. To celebrate, Mom decided to throw a garden party at our family home. The irony was a bitter pill I had to swallow. The garden they were celebrating in, the one with the pristine stone patio, the flourishing flower beds, and the perfectly manicured lawn, was the one I had built. Years earlier, before my business failed, I had poured a summer of sweat and love into that space as a gift for my parents. I designed it, dug it, planted it. It was one of the first projects I was ever truly proud of. Now it was just a backdrop for Emily's success. I heard about the party indirectly, through a Facebook post my aunt shared. It was a photo of the printed invitations, elegant and floral. "Celebrating Emily and Mark's new home," it read. My name wasn't on the guest list. I wasn't even told about it. A part of me, the weak part that still craved their approval, wanted to believe it was just an oversight, a mistake. So I decided to go. Not to crash the party, but to extend an olive branch, to show them I wasn't bitter. I spent the morning at a local nursery, not my own, not yet, and picked out the perfect gift, a Japanese maple sapling. It was a beautiful, delicate tree, one that would grow strong and provide shade for years to come. It was a piece of me, a piece of the work I loved, and I thought maybe, just maybe, they would see the sentiment behind it. That afternoon, I drove to my childhood home. Cars lined the street, luxury sedans and SUVs belonging to my parents' friends and Emily's new wealthy circle. I could hear the faint sound of string music and polite laughter drifting over the fence. I parked down the block and carried the small potted tree in my arms. It felt heavier with each step. I didn't go through the backyard gate. I walked up the front steps and rang the doorbell, feeling like a stranger. My mother answered, a glass of white wine in her hand. She was wearing a beautiful floral dress and looked radiant, flushed with the success of the party. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a second. Surprise flickered in her eyes, followed by something else. Annoyance. "Olivia," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. She stepped halfway onto the porch, partially blocking the doorway as if to prevent me from coming inside. "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to drop this off for Emily," I said, holding up the sapling, a housewarming gift. Her eyes darted back and forth between me and the tree, then over my shoulder to the street, as if she was afraid someone might see me standing there. The sound of laughter erupted from the backyard, and a woman's voice called out, "Helen, we need you for the toast." Mom's face tightened. She looked at me, at my dusty work boots and my plain jeans. I hadn't thought to dress up. I was coming from my own land, from a morning spent pulling weeds. I was me, and I wasn't party ready. "Oh, honey," she whispered, leaning in closer. Her voice was syrupy with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry, I should have called you. This is really just guests only. It's family day. Guests only. Family day." The words didn't make sense together. I was family, but in that moment, standing on the porch of the home I grew up in, I understood perfectly. There were two kinds of family in her eyes. The ones who belonged inside, laughing in the garden, and the one who was standing on the outside, holding a tree. I was not a guest, but I was also not welcome. I was an embarrassment, a problem she didn't want to have to explain. My face felt hot. I could feel the blood rushing to my cheeks, but my voice when I spoke was quiet. "I see." I looked past her through the open door and caught a glimpse of Emily in the backyard. She was holding court, laughing, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged. "I'll just leave this for her," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Don't be silly," Mom said quickly, already turning to go back inside. "We have professional landscapers for the new house. Just take it with you." She gave me one last, fleeting look of pity. "We'll talk later, okay?" She closed the door, leaving me alone on the porch. The lock clicked shut. I stood there for a full minute, the Japanese maple still in my arms. I looked down at its delicate red leaves, a symbol of new beginnings, a gift from the heart, and it had been rejected without a second thought. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing. A profound, hollow emptiness where all the hope and hurt used to be. It was the moment the fight finally went out of me. The moment I stopped trying, I turned around and walked away from the house. I walked down the driveway, past all the shiny, expensive cars, and I didn't look back. When I reached the curb, I gently set the potted plant down on the grass strip by the side of the road. I left it there, a small, abandoned thing. As I got in my truck and drove away, I knew something inside me had changed for good. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at their table anymore. I wasn't even going to ask for an invitation. I was going to build my own. Leaving that Japanese maple on the curb was like leaving my old self behind. The girl who desperately wanted her family's approval was gone. In her place was a woman with 5 acres of weeds and a cold, hard resolve. The drive back to my land wasn't filled with tears. It was filled with a quiet, humming energy. The pity in my mother's eyes had lit a fire in me. The very next day, I moved onto my land permanently. It wasn't much of a move. I just stopped pretending my trailer was a temporary solution. This forgotten field behind a long gravel road was my home now. I stood in the middle of it that morning, the sun just starting to rise, and took it all in. The tangled briars, the stubborn rocks, the patches of clay soil. Most people would see a wasteland. My parents saw a failure. I saw a foundation. I started with 0. Less than 0, actually. I had debt from my last business and barely enough money in my account to buy groceries for the month. So I did the only thing I could. I sold my old truck. It hurt. That truck had been my partner in my first business, the one symbol of my failed dream. Watching the new owner drive it away felt like a final goodbye to the girl I used to be. But the cash I got from it was a lifeline. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin. I didn't buy a new vehicle. I bought tools, a heavy-duty brush cutter, a sturdy wheelbarrow, shovels, rakes, and a pickaxe for the rocky soil. My new life was going to be built by hand. For the first few months, my world shrank to the size of those 5 acres. My days were governed by the sun. I was up before dawn, my hands wrapped in thick leather gloves, and I worked until my muscles screamed and the sky turned purple. I started in one corner and began to clear the brush. It was brutal physical work. Thorns tore at my clothes and my skin. I unearthed rocks the size of watermelons, using nothing but a shovel and leverage to pry them out of the earth. My back was a constant dull ache. My hands were a mess of blisters and cuts. Some evenings, I would sit on the steps of my trailer, too tired to even cook, and look at the small patch of cleared land. It was a pathetic sight, a tiny square of brown in a sea of green and gray brush. But it was mine. Every inch of it was earned with my own sweat. Neighbors, the few that lived down the long country road, would sometimes stop by. They'd lean against their pickup trucks, a polite curiosity on their faces. "What are you fixing to do with all this, little lady?" one older farmer asked me, his eyes scanning the chaos of my property. "I'm opening a nursery," I told him, my voice steady despite my exhaustion, "for native plants. Things that are meant to grow here." He'd nod slowly, a smile playing on his lips. It was a kind smile, but it was filled with doubt. "Well, good luck to you," he'd say before driving off. Nobody believed me. To them, I was just some girl living in a trailer, playing in the dirt. Their skepticism was like gasoline on the fire inside me. I'd turn back to my work with a renewed determination. "I'll show you. I'll show all of you." The first year was about clearing. The second year was about building. With the land cleared, I took the last of my money and invested in the bones of my new business. I bought the materials for a small greenhouse, just a simple frame and plastic sheeting. I assembled it myself, following the instructions like a sacred text. When I finished, I stood inside the humid, sun-warmed space, and it felt like a cathedral. I laid out irrigation lines, a network of black tubing that snaked across the cleared ground, promising water and life. I started small. I focused on native Kentucky plants, wild bergamot, purple coneflower, blue mistflower, plants that were resilient, that belonged in this soil, that could thrive in the harsh conditions. I gathered seeds, propagated cuttings, and nurtured tiny seedlings in my greenhouse. My first customers weren't wealthy homeowners. They were local landscapers who were starting to get requests for more sustainable, low-maintenance gardens. I sold them my plants from a fold-out table at the end of my gravel driveway. My prices were low, but my plants were strong and healthy. The first landscaper who bought from me, a guy named Dave, came back a week later. "Those coneflowers you sold me were the best I've ever seen," he said. "What else you got?" Word started to spread. By the end of year 2, I had contracts with 3 local landscaping companies. I had to build a second, larger greenhouse to keep up with demand. By year 3, I wasn't just a girl playing in the dirt anymore. I had a name, Olivia's Roots and Restoration. I wasn't just selling plants. I was selling a philosophy. I was restoring a little piece of the natural world that had been forgotten. One evening, I stood on the same spot where I had stood 3 years earlier, surveying my land. But it was no longer a wasteland. It was a thriving, organized grid of green. The greenhouses hummed with fans. The irrigation system hissed softly, delivering water to thousands of growing things. My land, the one Dad had called worthless and Mom had seen as a symbol of my failure, was blooming. It was alive, and it had brought me back to life with it. Success has a smell. It's not the sweet scent of flowers. It's the sharp, undeniable scent of independence. And my family, who had been absent for 3 years, started to smell it on the wind. The visits began subtly. They were framed as casual, accidental drop-ins. My mother was the first. She pulled up my long gravel driveway one afternoon in her pristine Lexus, a cloud of dust billowing behind her. She got out of the car holding a bag of groceries. "I was just at the store and thought of you," she said, avoiding eye contact with the sprawling greenhouses and rows of organized plant beds. Her eyes scanned my trailer, the neatly swept porch, the simple wooden chair I'd built for myself. Her face was a mask of polite concern. "Are you eating properly out here, Olivia?" "I'm fine, Mom. I have a garden," I said, pointing to the small vegetable patch I'd cultivated near my trailer. "I don't need anything." The groceries were an excuse, a Trojan horse to get a look at what I was doing. She walked around, her expensive sandals crunching on the gravel path. She peered into a greenhouse, her expression unreadable. "It's a lot of work," she finally said, as if that were a new revelation. She didn't compliment it. She didn't condemn it. She just observed it, like a scientist studying a strange new specimen. She left after 10 minutes, the bag of groceries sitting untouched on my porch. My father's visit was even more telling. He didn't come onto the property. I just saw his truck driving slowly down the main road one Saturday, and then again the next. He was curious about the project, as he later told my aunt. He was a builder. He understood scale, labor, and profit. He couldn't ignore the fact that the useless patch of dirt now had structures, irrigation, and a steady stream of commercial trucks coming and going. He was assessing it, calculating its value, and I knew the numbers weren't adding up to the failure he had written me off as. He never stopped, never waved. He just watched from a distance. Then came Emily. Her visit was the most transparent of all. She drove up one sunny afternoon, dressed in an expensive athletic outfit, looking like she'd just come from a yoga class. She had a bright, artificial smile plastered on her face. "Liv, oh my gosh, look at this place!" she gushed, her eyes wide with feigned astonishment. "It's incredible. You've done so much." I just nodded, wiping dirt from my hands onto my jeans. "It keeps me busy." She walked beside me as I inspected a row of black-eyed Susans. Her voice was sugary sweet, the same tone she used when she wanted something as a child. "You're doing so well, Liv. We're all so proud of you." I stopped and looked at her. "We're all so proud of you." The words felt hollow, a cheap currency she was trying to use to buy her way back in. They hadn't been proud when I was clearing rocks by hand. They weren't proud when I was living on canned beans in my trailer. Their pride was a recent development, one that coincided directly with my success. "Mark and I were talking," she continued, getting to the real reason for her visit. "Our backyard is just so boring, and the landscapers we've talked to are so uninspired. We were thinking, who better to help us than my talented sister? Maybe you can help us redesign our yard?" It was a test, a way to see if I was still the old Olivia, the one who would drop everything for a crumb of their approval. She was offering me a chance to finally work on her perfect house, to be let into the world I had been shut out of. I looked at her clean fingernails, and her effortless smile. I thought about the garden party. I thought about the Japanese maple left on the curb. "I'm sorry, Emily," I said, my voice calm and even. "I can't." Her smile twitched. "Oh, well, we'd pay you, of course. Whatever your rate is." "It's not about the money," I said, turning back to my plants. "I'm fully booked with my commercial contracts. I don't have time for residential projects right now." She was silent for a moment. The sugary sweetness in her voice evaporated, replaced by a cold edge of disbelief. She frowned, a deep line forming between her brows, as if I had just broken some unspoken rule. I had been offered a chance to be useful to her, and I had turned it down. The power dynamic had shifted and she didn't like it. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "Well, that's a shame." She didn't stay much longer. As she drove away, I understood something with perfect clarity. They hadn't come to reconnect. They hadn't come for love, or to apologize, or to admit they were wrong. They came because I had built something on my own terms, something that they couldn't control. My success was a mystery to them, and they were drawn to it, not to celebrate it, but to see how it could benefit them. Their sudden visits weren't about family. They were about reclaiming territory. But this land was mine, and it was no longer up for negotiation. 2 months after my family's sudden, unwelcome reappearance in my life, I got a call that shifted the ground beneath my feet more profoundly than any shovel ever could. It was my mother. Her voice was thin and brittle, stripped of its usual manipulative warmth. "Olivia," she said, and there was a tremor in her voice I hadn't heard since I was a child and had fallen out of a tree. "It's your father. He had a stroke this morning. He's gone." I didn't know what to say. "Gone?" The word felt stupid and small. There was a dry sob on the other end of the line. "He passed away an hour ago at the hospital. The funeral is on Friday." Then she hung up. "No, are you okay? No, I need you here." It was a notification, not a shared moment of grief. My relationship with my father had been one of vast, silent distances. He was a presence in my childhood, a figure at the head of the dinner table, but I didn't really know him. I knew he liked his coffee black and his blueprints precise. I knew he was proud of Emily and disappointed in me. He had given me the land, an act I had interpreted as guilty dismissal. We hadn't had a real conversation in years. His death felt less like a personal loss and more like a final, quiet statement on our disconnected relationship. I felt a strange, hollow ache, the grief of losing something I never really had in the first place. The funeral was a blur of black suits, muted whispers, and the cloying scent of lilies. I stood in the back, separate from my mother and Emily, who formed a tight, impenetrable unit of grief at the front. They accepted condolences with practiced grace. People looked at me with expressions of pity, the same pity my mother had perfected over the years. They saw the daughter who lived in a trailer, the one who didn't fit. I felt like a stranger watching a movie about a family I vaguely recognized. A week later, I got a call from a man named Mr. Green. He introduced himself as my father's lawyer and requested my presence for the reading of the will. He was firm and formal, stating that my attendance was not optional. I drove into the city, to a law office in a tall glass building that felt a world away from my greenhouses and gravel paths. The conference room was cold and silent. Polished mahogany, leather chairs, and a window that looked out over a city I no longer felt a part of. My mother was there, her face pale and drawn. Emily sat beside her, holding her hand, her expression one of solemn importance. My brother, quiet as ever, sat on the other side of the table, staring at his phone. They all looked at me when I walked in, a flicker of surprise in their eyes, as if they hadn't expected me to actually show up. I took a seat by myself, leaving an empty chair between us. Mr. Green was an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He adjusted his glasses and opened a thick file folder. "We are here today to execute the last will and testament of Alan Walker," he began, his voice calm and professional. He went through the preliminary details: assets, accounts, minor bequests to distant relatives. My mother and Emily listened intently, their bodies leaning forward. I just stared out the window, watching the clouds. I expected nothing. My father had given me my consolation prize years ago. I was just there as a formality. "To my son Jacob," Mr. Green read, "I leave the sum of $50,000, to be used as he sees fit." My brother looked up from his phone, a flicker of surprise on his face, before nodding and looking back down. "To my beloved daughter, Emily," he continued, and I could feel my sister straighten in her chair, "I leave the sum of $20,000 along with her mother's jewelry to be inherited upon her mother's passing." A sharp, audible gasp came from Emily. "20,000?" she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. She looked at my mother, who looked just as shocked. "That can't be right. Dad's company alone is worth millions." Mr. Green did not look up from the paper. He calmly continued, "The majority of the shares in Walker Construction were transferred into a trust for your mother, Helen, 5 years ago. This will only pertains to Alan's personal assets." Mom relaxed slightly, but Emily was still tense. 20,000 was an insult to her. It was a fraction of what they had given her for her house. The air in the room was thick with her indignation. Then Mr. Green adjusted his glasses again and looked directly at me. "And to my daughter, Olivia." I felt my mother and sister turn their heads to stare at me. I could feel the heat of their gaze. "The will states," the lawyer said, his voice clear and deliberate, "I confirm that the 5-acre parcel of land, designated as Lot 7B, is hers outright, as previously deeded. In addition, I bequeath to her the remainder of the property, designated as Lot 7, consisting of the 35 adjoining acres, including the main residential structure and all outbuildings located therein." Silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I tried to process the words. The 35 adjoining acres, the main residential structure, their house. He was giving me the land their house sat on. All of it. 40 acres in total. Emily was the first to break the silence. Her voice was a sharp, strangled cry. "What? That's impossible. That's our home. She doesn't even live in that neighborhood." My mother looked like the air had been punched from her body. Her face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She just stared at Mr. Green, then at me, her eyes wide with a horror that was quickly curdling into rage. Mr. Green held up a hand for silence. He looked at Emily with a patient, unbothered expression. "Your father amended the deed and the will last year. It is all perfectly legal and has been verified." He then looked back down at the page and continued reading, his voice filling the stunned silence. "He included a personal note to be read at this time." The lawyer cleared his throat. He said, and I quote, he paused, and in that moment the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Emily was given every advantage, and she used them well. But Olivia was given nothing but a patch of dirt, and she built something from nothing. "She'll know what to do with this." The words landed in the center of the room like a stone dropped into a still pond. She built something from nothing. It was the validation I had craved my entire life. It was the acknowledgement of the 16-hour days, the blisters, the sweat, the struggle. And it had come from the one person I never thought would see it. It was a posthumous whisper of pride from a man who had been silent for so long. I looked at my mother and sister. Their shock had now fully morphed into incandescent fury. Emily was shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no." My mother's eyes were locked on me, and the look in them was terrifying. It was the look of someone whose entire world, whose entire sense of order and justice had just been set on fire. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt a deep seismic shift inside me. My father, in his final act, had done more than just give me land. He had given me the one thing my mother and sister had always withheld: acknowledgement. He had seen me, and in doing so, he had handed me all the power. The worthless daughter, the forgotten one, now owned the ground beneath their feet. The days following the will reading were unnervingly quiet. It was the silence before a storm. I went back to my nursery, to the familiar rhythm of watering seedlings and managing orders. The earth beneath my feet felt different, more solid. It was all mine now. The weight and wonder of it were overwhelming. I'd walk the perimeter of my original 5 acres and stare out at the rolling hills and stands of trees that now belonged to me. I could see the roof of my childhood home in the distance, a place that was now, impossibly, my property. I avoided their calls for 3 days. I needed the silence to let my father's final words sink in. She built something from nothing. It was a shield, a foundation. A quiet truth I could stand on when the inevitable storm hit, and it hit on the 4th day. My phone rang and it was my mother. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I knew I couldn't put it off forever. I answered, my voice a calm, simple, "Hello? Olivia, sweetheart." Her tone was syrup, thick and cloying and completely fake. It was the voice she used when she wanted something, a weaponized sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. "I'm so glad I reached you. I've been so worried." "I'm fine, Mom," I said, keeping my voice even. Good, she said, a little too quickly. "Listen, honey, about the will. Your father. He wasn't himself at the end. Confused. This whole thing is just a terrible, terrible mistake." I stayed silent. I let her talk, knowing that if I gave her nothing, she would reveal everything. "You know, sweetheart," she cooed, "you don't need all that property. It's such a burden. All those taxes, the upkeep on the house. It's too much for a single girl like you to handle. We could take care of it for you. We could manage it, keep it in the family, the way your father would have wanted, the way your father would have wanted." The lie was so blatant, so disrespectful to the very words he had left behind, that I almost laughed. She was trying to erase his final act, to rewrite it to fit her own narrative. They didn't want to manage it for me. They wanted to take it back. They wanted to restore the old order where they held all the assets and I had nothing. "I'll think about it," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a lie, but it was the only way to end the conversation. "You do that, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with relief. "We're family. We'll work this out." She hung up, and I stood there for a long moment, looking out at the empire I had built. She still didn't get it. She still thought I was the same girl who would do anything for a scrap of her approval. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily. Her approach was different, more direct, but just as insulting. "Liv, Mom told me she spoke to you. Let's not make this difficult. We know you don't want the house. Mark and I have discussed it, and we are prepared to pay you fair market value for the 35 acres. $300,000. It's more than you'd get from anyone else for that land. Please don't make this hard on Mom." I stared at the message. $300,000 for 35 acres of prime Kentucky land and a 4,000 square foot custom-built home. It wasn't a fair offer. It was a joke. It was what they thought I was worth. They thought I was so stupid, so desperate for cash, that I would leap at the first number they threw at me. Please don't make this hard on Mom. The classic manipulation, positioning me as the aggressor, the troublemaker, for simply existing and holding what was rightfully mine. I didn't respond. I put my phone on silent and went to work. I spent the rest of the day repotting oak saplings, my hands deep in the rich, dark soil. The physical labor grounded me. With every tree I settled into a new pot, I felt my resolve harden. They saw land and money. They saw assets to be controlled. They didn't see what my father had seen. They didn't see the years of work, the vision. They didn't see me. That evening, I sat down at my small kitchen table with the thick packet of documents Mr. Green had given me. I decided to read through every single page of the will and the property deeds myself. I wanted to understand everything, to know my position from every angle. It was dense with legal jargon, but I took my time, looking up terms I didn't understand, and that's when I found it. It was a single page, an addendum to the deed transfer that my father had signed and had notarized just 6 months before he died. It was a short, simple clause, nestled among paragraphs of legalese. My eyes scanned it once, then twice. I read it out loud to myself, my voice a whisper in the quiet trailer. The property, consisting of Lots 7 and 7B, in its entirety cannot be sold, transferred, or subdivided to any direct family member, including spouse, children, or their spouses. Within the first 5 years of the execution of this will, I leaned back in my chair, the papers trembling slightly in my hand. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of victory or triumph. It was a smile of awe my father had known. He had known his family. He had anticipated their every move. He knew they would try to pressure me, to buy me out, to manipulate me into giving up the land. He had seen their greed and their sense of entitlement, and he had built a fortress around me to protect me from it. He hadn't just given me the land. He had given me time. 5 years. 5 years of peace. 5 years for me to put down my own roots so deep into that soil that nothing and no one could ever pull me out. It was poetic. It was brilliant. It was legal revenge wrapped in ink, a final checkmate from beyond the grave. I thought about my mother's syrupy voice and Emily's insulting text message. They were playing a game, and they didn't even know that their father had already ensured they would lose. I still said nothing. I let them call. I let them text. I let them spin their wheels, believing they still had some power, some angle they could play. I held my father's final gift close to my chest, the land, the acknowledgement, and the beautiful, impenetrable silence of that single, perfect clause. My silence drove them to desperation. After a week of unanswered calls and texts, they decided to force the issue. They showed up at my nursery one evening, just as the sun was beginning to set. The golden light was casting long shadows across the rows of plants, and the air was filled with the peaceful, earthy smell of damp soil and blooming flowers. It was my favorite time of day, a time of quiet satisfaction. Their arrival shattered it completely. My mother's Lexus came crunching down the gravel driveway far too fast, spitting rocks. Emily's SUV followed right behind. They got out of their cars at the same time, their movements sharp and angry. They hadn't come to talk. They had come for a fight. They marched toward my largest greenhouse, where I was finishing up my watering for the day. I saw them coming and took a deep breath, setting down the watering wand. I stood my ground, right there in the doorway of the structure I had built with my own hands. This was my territory. They were the intruders here. "Olivia, this has gone on long enough," my mother started, her voice high and strained. There was no syrupy sweetness left, only raw, ragged anger. "You have been ignoring our calls. We are your family. You do not treat your family this way. What do you want, Mom?" I asked, my voice calm. Inside, my heart was pounding, but I refused to let them see it. "What do we want?" Emily burst out, her face flushed and her eyes flashing. "What do we want? We want you to stop being so unbelievably selfish. We want you to do the right thing." I looked from her face to my mother's. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front of indignation. It was the same way they had stood together at my father's funeral, the same way they had presented themselves to the world my entire life, the perfect mother and the perfect daughter. And I was the obstacle to their perfect world. "The right thing?" I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "What is the right thing, Emily?" "Giving us back our home," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. They were tears of frustration, not sadness. "Dad made a mistake. He was sick, he wasn't thinking clearly. He would never have wanted this. He would never have wanted his wife to be kicked out of her own house." "No one is kicking anyone out," I said simply. "Don't play games with us, Olivia," my mother snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me. "We know what this is. This is your pathetic little revenge because you were always jealous of your sister." The accusation was so old, so tired, that it had lost all its power to wound me. I used to believe it myself, that the ache inside me was jealousy. But I knew now it had never been about what Emily had. It was about what I had been denied: respect, support, a place to belong. "You think I'm jealous?" I asked, a genuine curiosity in my voice. "Of what?" "Of everything," Emily shot back. "My career, my husband, my life. A life you could never have because you were too busy playing in the dirt." I looked around me. I looked at the thousands of healthy, thriving plants that stretched out in neat rows under the soft evening light. I looked at the sturdy greenhouses, the complex irrigation system, the signs of a successful growing business. I looked at the sun setting over the hills of the land that was now mine, all mine. This wasn't playing. This was building. "You're being selfish," my mother shouted, her voice cracking. "You have this little hobby. It's enough for you. You don't need a big house and all that land. You don't even know what to do with that land." Her words echoed the past. "You can't even hold a job. You need to be realistic. You'll never have what she has." It was the same script, the same chorus of disapproval they had sung to me my whole life. But the words didn't hurt anymore. They sounded hollow, desperate. They were the last shots fired from a battle they had already lost. I let the silence stretch out. I let their angry, ugly words dissipate into the peaceful air of the nursery. I looked at their tight, furious faces, and I didn't feel anger in return. I felt a profound, bottomless pity for them. They were trapped in a world where value was measured only in money and status. They couldn't see the wealth that surrounded me, the life I had cultivated from nothing. They couldn't understand it, and so they had to attack it. Finally, I looked from my mother to my sister, my gaze steady and clear. "Actually," I said calmly, my voice quiet but firm, carrying easily in the still evening air, "I do." I saw the flicker of confusion in their eyes. They had expected me to scream, to cry, to argue, to defend myself. They had come armed for a battle, and I had refused to pick up a weapon. My calmness was a wall they couldn't scale. My father's last words echoed in my mind. "She'll know what to do with this." He had trusted me. He had believed in me. And their opinions, their shouting, their demands, they were nothing compared to the weight of that trust. I held their gaze for one last moment, letting them see that there was nothing left in me for them to hurt. Then, without another word, I turned around. I walked back into my greenhouse, picked up the watering wand, and turned the gentle spray back onto a bed of young lavender plants. I didn't look back to see their reactions. I could feel their stunned silence behind me. They had come to my world to tear me down, but their power was gone. They were just two angry women standing in a garden that they would never understand, created by a daughter they had never known. Dad had given me exactly what I needed: soil, space, and the silence to finally hear my own voice. And I wasn't going to let anyone shout over it ever again. The 5 years my father's will had given me were not just a waiting period. They were a period of intense creation. The confrontation with my mother and sister was the last time I allowed their world to intrude upon mine. I built a wall not of fences, but of focus. All the energy I had once spent craving their approval, I now poured into the soil. By the end of the 5th year, Olivia's roots and restoration was unrecognizable from the small operation run out of a single greenhouse. It had become one of the largest and most respected native plant and eco-nurseries in the state. We had expanded to 7 massive greenhouses, a tissue culture lab, and a fleet of 3 delivery trucks. I had 12 full-time employees, horticulturists, laborers, and an office manager who handled the endless paperwork. We no longer sold plants from a folding table. We supplied native grasses, wildflowers, and trees for huge government restoration projects along highways and in state parks. We had research contracts with the university's agricultural department, testing drought-resistant strains of local flora. I had transformed 5 acres of weeds into a thriving, vital business. And the 35 acres surrounding it gave me the space to dream even bigger. My mother still lived in the house. The will had granted her the right to live there for the rest of her life, but the deed was in my name. We had no contact. I sent a check to her bank account every month to cover the property taxes, an anonymous electronic transfer. It was a cold, clean arrangement. Emily and her husband had moved to a different state 2 years prior, after Mark got a promotion. I heard about it through the grapevine. We never spoke. They had become ghosts from a past life. The centerpiece of my 5-year plan was something personal. On a beautiful, rolling section of the property, overlooking the original 5 acres, I had spent the last 2 years building something special. It wasn't another greenhouse or a new lab. It was a public space, a learning center and botanical garden dedicated to the native ecosystems of Kentucky. I funded the entire project myself. I called it the Allen Arboretum. Naming it after my father was a complicated decision. He was not a perfect man, and our relationship had been defined by distance and his quiet disapproval. But in his final act, he had given me everything. He had seen the part of me that no one else had bothered to look for. The Arboretum wasn't just a memorial. It was a testament to his last clear moment of seeing me. It was a garden built from the seed of acknowledgement he had planted. It was my way of saying thank you, and my way of finally letting him go. The opening ceremony was on a bright, clear day in October. The autumn leaves on the trees were brilliant shades of red and gold. We had invited clients, university partners, local officials, and the media. Hundreds of people milled about on the stone pathways, admiring the carefully curated gardens and the beautiful, modern learning center I had designed with an architect. I stood on a small wooden podium, looking out at the crowd. My employees stood in the front row, beaming with pride. Dave, the first landscaper who had ever bought plants from me, gave me a thumbs up. Mr. Green, now retired, sat in a folding chair, smiling warmly. This was my family now. The one I had built, not the one I had been born into. I gave a short speech about the importance of native plants, about restoring our local environment, about the educational mission of the Arboretum. I thanked my team, my clients, and the community for their support. As I finished, a young reporter from a regional magazine raised her hand for a question. "Ms. Walker," she began, "this is an incredible achievement, and it's all the more impressive that you've built it on your own family's land. We understand your mother still resides on the property. Is your family attending the ceremony today? How do they feel about this incredible transformation? The crowd quieted. The question was personal, but her tone was respectful. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on me, all of them curious. This was the moment to tell my story, to expose the drama, to claim my victimhood publicly. The old Olivia might have done that, but I wasn't the old Olivia anymore. I didn't need their shame to validate my success. I smiled, a calm, genuine smile. I looked past the reporter, toward the distant roofline of my mother's house, barely visible through the trees. My family and I have had different perspectives over the years, I began, my voice clear and steady. When I first started here, with nothing but a trailer and 5 acres of weeds, they said this land would never be worth anything. I paused, letting the words settle. I then looked back at the crowd, at the beautiful gardens, at the faces of my team. I guess we just measured value differently. A murmur went through the crowd, a sound of understanding and respect. It was the truth. It was the whole story in a single sentence. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement of fact. They valued money, status, and appearances. I valued growth, resilience, and the quiet, steady work of building something real from the ground up. The reporter nodded, satisfied. After the ceremony, as people explored the arboretum, Mr. Green came up to me. "Your father would be very proud." "Olivia," he said, his eyes kind. "I hope so," I replied, watching a group of school children laugh as they pointed out a monarch butterfly on a milkweed plant. In that moment, standing in the middle of the garden that bore his name, I finally believed it. One evening, long after the crowds from the opening ceremony had gone home, I walked the property line alone. The sun had set, and the Kentucky sky was a deep, bruised purple, dotted with the first faint stars. I slipped off my boots and walked barefoot in the cool, damp soil, the same soil that had once broken my back and had ultimately healed my heart. The air was still, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind moving through the tall prairie grasses I had planted years ago. I walked past the greenhouses, dark and silent now, their precious cargo sleeping within. I walked along the edge of the Allen Arboretum, its pathways lit by soft, low-voltage lights. As I stood on a small hill overlooking the entire 40 acres, a memory came to me, clear and sharp as if it were happening right then. I was back in my parents' living room, sitting in the forgotten chair, and my mother's voice echoed in my mind, as crisp and cutting as it had been that night. "You can't even hold a job." The words just floated there in the quiet of my mind. They didn't sting. They didn't burn. They were just words from a person I used to know, from a life that no longer felt like mine. I looked down at my hands, the calluses still there but softer now, the hands of a business owner, a creator. I was holding more than a job. I was holding a legacy. The wind moved through the leaves of the oak trees I'd planted as saplings, and they rustled with a sound like a gentle sigh. For the first time standing there, I realized I didn't feel a single ounce of anger towards my mother or my sister. The fiery need for revenge, the ache of betrayal, it had all been composted, turned into the rich soil of the life I now lived. I didn't need them to see me, to approve of me, or to apologize. Their validation was no longer the nutrient I needed to grow. I felt peace, a deep, quiet, unshakable peace that came from the earth itself. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about fighting back or taking back what was stolen from you. It's not about making others feel the pain they made you feel. It's about letting the earth grow over the wound. It's about tending to your own garden so diligently that the scars become part of the landscape, hidden beneath a riot of wildflowers. It's about building a life so beautiful and so strong that the voices of the past are nothing more than the rustling of dead leaves. It's about blooming anyway.